Hi everybody, Lynn Cox here, clinical hypnotherapist, rapid transformational therapist, here with little Jimmy. I was meaning to get on and talk about two things, fear and addiction. I'm going to focus on fear today. As a hypnotherapist, I do see a lot of people who are dealing with overcoming their fears. So what's important about fear? Why is it a worthwhile endeavor to look at addressing this? Why do we have fears? And what can we do about them? So number one, I'm a firm believer that the way that we do one thing, our approach in one thing is kind of how we approach everything. Human beings, we become habituated in how we behave pretty easily. It happens pretty quickly. So from the fear perspective, if you think about it, if you consistently turn away from fear and don't address your fears, that's going to become your habit of behavior and your habit of response if you don't interrupt and interject that type of reaction and response. Typically the fears that we have are more neurotic fears than anything. And I'm not trying to be rude or dismissive when I say neurotic. Things like basic fears and phobias, fear of public speaking, fears of spiders, fears of flying, fears of opening yourself up to relationships and intimacy. I mean, these fears are typically not life-threatening. Even in the case, some would maybe beg to differ with the fear of flying, but actually, statistically, logically speaking, you have a much greater chance of having a car accident than you do having an accident in an airplane. So we become habituated in the way that we respond and the way that we react to situations and to life. So if you find if something is slightly uncomfortable for you, or you feel a little bit fearful or worried and your go-to is to turn away, this will become your pattern of behavior. And if you want to live that way, that's everybody's choice. But typically it's it's not very good for the self-esteem. It doesn't build a sense of self-confidence, of self-reliance, of self-respect even. So, having courage is an attribute that is, I think, always really worth looking at developing, and especially even setting a good example for young people. How do you know what your fears are? One great exercise that somebody who I highly admire has recommended doing, and I think this is very effective, is to do a fear pyramid. So start with, you need to take a little bit of time, and you might need to do this over the course of a few days. But start with your fears. Go from your smallest fear at the bottom of the pyramid up to your biggest fear. And these will range for everybody. But to spend the time writing them down from the seemingly most kind of maybe silly fear, i.e., a fear of spiders. Maybe that's your bottom level one, or a fear of snakes or something like that. But spend a little bit of time writing them down. If you find that you're struggling to identify what your fears are, another good way to identify your fears are to tap into your physiological responses and reactions to things, because we do have a physiological response to fear. And again, for everybody, it's slightly different. For some, it could be clammy hands, tight chest, sick feeling in the stomach, sweating, shortness of breath. And one very, very common one is lethargy, feeling tired, feeling like you have no energy. These are all indicators, physiological indicators of what it is that you fear. So spending a little bit of time figuring out what your fears are, super helpful to overcoming them. Another important thing to remember and to think about is that everybody has fear. Everybody feels fear in different situations. but people have different ways to address, cope, and work with fear. So the best, really, I have to say, hands down, the best way to address fear, a fear that you have, is to launch yourself right into it, to basically surrender to it. So to basically do the thing that you're fearing. So in the example of public speaking, maybe it is that you sign up for a group like Toastmasters, or put your hand up to moderate a meeting at work and lead it, or to, an extreme end of things would be to work your way up to doing some kind of a performance in front of a larger group of people. So just to surrender yourself to it. And why would this be an important activity to do? Because it does two things. It changes your pattern of behavior. It changes your pattern of thought, and you will have and I guarantee if somebody does this and doesn't have this experience, please let me know. You will have such a deep emotional experience once you dive into something, and then the outcome is far better than your fear was having you believe. You will very likely feel so much more competent, confident. You may feel exhilarated. You will feel an increase in energy, and this starts to build the solid skills and the solid foundation of acting with courage and perceiving challenges and perceiving approaching fearful situations in a different way. This will start to set up a new chain of reaction, response, thought patterns, and emotions. I'm going to give you a really good example. So I've talked about this before. So I was in a relationship with a violent person. I exited that relationship, and then I was deeply committed to studying martial arts. And I intuitively knew that kind of getting more confidence in my body, building my self-esteem, but also getting comfortable with one of the activities I would do with my teacher a lot would be sparring, one-to-one sparring. So if you think about it from the perspective of having been in some very terrifying situations in past in terms of physical altercations with somebody much stronger than me, to put myself in a position on a week-by-week basis with, private lessons, and knowing that we were 9 chances out of 10 going to be spending the last, 10 minutes or so sparring. And it was a kind of a mitigated situation, because I knew that my teacher would never actually hurt me, but just even that experience of being in that close of proximity, people who don't even have a background of being involved in violent situations in past, your physiological response, like your physiology, will go off the charts. So it forces you to learn how to manage it. So I remember in those early days of sparring, my reaction was I just wanted to run away. I wanted to run away. If somebody's coming at you, even though it was in a safe environment, your physiological response is to want to run away. Now, I kept on going back. I could have just quit doing that and said to myself, that's uncomfortable. But I knew that I was looking to master that type of fear, so I kept on going back. I'd be in a situation where my teacher would put up barriers around us. So we used staffs in martial arts, and he would put up a barrier, almost like a ring, but with staffs on the ground. So you had to stay in the zone. You couldn't run away. So it was, perhaps maybe a little bit more on the extreme end, but that was absolutely diving right into that fear. And then I got to the point where I loved to spar. I was able to figure out ways to manage my breathing, try to relax into it, because the more fearful you get, if you don't manage your physiological reactions, it becomes very difficult for you to respond and to move and to, kind of be engaged in that, what I'll call kind of like a dance, right? It's really like a dance. And it absolutely did, it impacted my self-confidence by leaps and bounds. Once I went from that extreme, fearful, physiological response to, I can't wait, I hope we're going to spar, I love it, it's fun, it was physically challenging, difficult, but it gave me such a sense of confidence. I knew that this was something I wanted to try, that I'd felt fear of before, and and I do believe that was kind of the kickstart point to then making other decisions in my life that I'd been fearful about. Taking the training to become a hypnotherapist, putting my hand up and going after becoming an instructor in later years, working to build my business. When we dive in and surrender and take the cue that, okay, that thing that I'm avoiding, or the thing that I have the physiological response to, that's your signal to basically overcome that particular fear. And if you don't want to, that's fine, but it really does help to build it helps to build these skills that will carry you throughout life and that you can depend on. It starts to change the way that you perceive challenges. And you can actually then get to a point where you convince yourself that if I'm feeling that reaction that feels like fear, this actually might mean that this is excitement, because we do have the same physiological response to excitement as we do to fear. It's a tweaking of the perception. And once you start to do this and start to do this repeatedly, it will change your level of confidence, how you feel about yourself, how you perceive yourself, what challenges you want to take on. And this can really have such a compounding impact on your entire life. So I just suggest, think about what you feel afraid of. Don't even get into trying to logically talk yourself out of why it's not really like a life-threatening fear. Don't even go there. Just figure out what are the things. What are the things? Write them down, and then really look to dive into them. Dive into addressing them do one by one by one, from the smallest fear up to the biggest. And I guarantee if you do this, it will absolutely change how you deal with life. And you will be, and you will feel far more courageous, far more skilled, far more capable. It will really build that confidence in yourself that regardless the situation that comes your way, you start to develop this knowledge in yourself that you can deal with any situation. And it's just a much happier, healthier, more vital way to live. So that's all I have to say about that. I will talk about addictions tomorrow. They're actually quite similar, slightly different, but it really is all about perception and then making the decision. But you have to surrender to a degree, and you have to understand that you're going to feel uncomfortable, but there is another side. And when you get to that other side, the reward is so fantastic. It's hard to put into words, but it will truly change the way that you perceive yourself in life. So I hope everyone's having a great day. Bye for now.